only one way really to answer this question, and that is exactly the way that we did it, which is to bury ourselves in the Scripture. Look at the key passages. And I think what it tells you is why the controversy exists. All of your, that's the same conclusions that I drew. I also felt, with group number one, that the first three passages were leaning toward the Presbyterian system. The second were leaning toward the Episcopal or Anglican system, and the third was leaning toward the Congregational. But I also agreed that although some of them seem to preclude some of the other systems, ultimately there was space for all three. And so in the early church, or let's say the New Testament church, it looks like the flexibility was there. Now, something we noticed about the early church, there was much more use of the gifts. It was much more open to leadership, and there was certainly authority, and authority well preserved. Later on, the church becomes more stylized. A lot of the positions that you see in the gift lists, they disappear out of church structure, and it just shrinks down to what we've got today. What we've got today in the Protestant church is a very slim structure. I mean, most churches have some kind of an eldership, some kind of diaconate, and some kind of ministerial team, but there are no official church healers. Teachers aren't necessarily, sometimes, they're usually equated to the minister, like they have a minister of education, but not necessarily a separate office, as it appears to be, if such a thing as offices existed in the early church. All right, so I think you are all exactly right. There is latitude for every one of the church structures. And it seems to be, depending on how your particular area or your ethnic group or your set understands church to be, there's biblical precedent for it. And I imagine the churches were probably that way. The church in Antioch looked very different than the church of Rome. And even in the New Testament times, because you can see that the way that they operated, they seem to be unique within the way that they did it. Church of Rome looked very hierarchical to me. Church of Antioch looks very congregational. And the others, very Presbyterian run in the list. You really want to pick very carefully with your elders. So they're all there. Now, okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give a general introduction to our speakers, then we're going to give you all a break, and then we're going to come back and they're going to say something about themselves, and we're going to address some questions together, and then as we're doing it, we're going to open this up, and ultimately we're going to move to a class global theology of what we should be doing as a church today in this pluralized and shrinking world. Okay? All right, this is going to be very brief, and we'll probably take a break within 5 to 10 minutes. All right. Now, I'm calling this little section the role and challenge of ethnic and other theologies of the church. Now, we've been exploring an initial theology of the church with its origins and its patristic adaptations and its current various structures. And we just saw that there's a precedent for all of them, so we probably really shouldn't be wasting our time fighting over which church structure is best. I think that no matter how you're put together, there is some orthodox expression of the church that's going to work for you. But I don't think it's worth fighting with the gang across the street over who's got the right church. No, you can fight over who's got the right theology, but not necessarily who's got the right church structure. The church of today is no longer monolithic, as we imagine it was in the Middle Ages before the Reformation. Although even then, that may not have been as true as it may appear to us, looking as we do at a distance, any more than the Roman Catholic Church today is as monolithic as it would like to idolize itself, or idealize itself. Seeing the faithful of every clime gathered obediently under the Pope and fulfilling the edicts of Rome. Let me give you an example of this. My wife and I were at a conference in Cuernavaca in Mexico. This was a meeting between the Central and South American and North American theologians and exegetes back in the 1800s, back in the 1980s, not the 1800s. No wonder they retired. No, but seriously, back in the 1980s, my wife was representing the South American side, and I was representing the North American side, which was kind of cute. But we learned while we were there in Cuernavaca that the nuns in the hills were giving communion. The nuns were. The Vatican, we were told, knew all about it, but was silent on the issue, treating it as if it was not happening, because they couldn't send male priests to do these functions. So the idea that the church is monolithic and runs by canon law is just as true as it's able to be done. But the Roman Catholic Church, like anything else, is a very varied and widely divergent communion that Rome is desperately trying to hold together with varied success. But you know, in parallel, even the evangelical church is experiencing wide varieties of meanings for each of its different constituencies. For example, in the storefronts, with whose pastors we ministered in Newark and Jersey City and Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, in the 1970s, churches met every single night. Holidays and birthdays and every familial event was celebrated with the church family. That's very typical of urban churches. Church was a refuge. It was the alternative to the bar rooms and the pool halls. And it was also a place to succeed and be honored, since the option was not always available in a larger hostile and oppressive culture. Every church does not necessarily do this. When we were living in Puerto Rico, the church had an official church poet. And on special days, the church poet would write a special poem, and it was part of the service to present the poem for the edification of the congregation. Now, in the suburbs, many families celebrate their holidays privately, taking space from their work and church commitments. You know, some hold two celebrations. Some have birthdays at church, as well as birthdays at home. At some churches, some of the folks gather together on Thanksgiving, while others don't. Our church, over the 30 years that we've done it, have actually done both. Some gather communally, and some just gather with their families. So we have a parallel thing. What a church means on Route 1, which would be a commuter church, what it does for its people over against a church maybe here in Roxbury, which is right in the center of its population, may look very different, though the basic theologies may be shared. Now here's one for you. This is from Sydney, Ohio. Another round and amen. I got this off the net. Beer was on tap, and a mechanical bull inspired the sermon as a new church held its inaugural service in a western Ohio bar. The Country Rock Church drew about 100 people to Sunday night's meeting at the Pub Lounge in Sydney, 35 miles north of Dayton. The Barroom Church is an offshoot of Sydney, the United First Methodist Church, whose head pastor says he's been looking for creative ways to reach people in unconventional places. Church's website, for its new branch, advertises, and I quote, top regional bands, pizza, wings, rowdy fun, and a short message. The Reverend Chris Heckerman says people really seem to enjoy themselves, so he expects the Country Rock Church will meet weekly. Heckerman's sermon compared staying on the bar's mechanical bull to learning how to get along in life. Here in Boston, for many years, I don't know if they still do this, but the House of Blues on Sunday morning would always have a gospel brunch. And for years, for a number of people, this was their church. Now, obviously, this is not going to work for Pilgrim Church. Since we deal with a lot of alcoholics, we are obviously not going to have beer on tap. That's just not going to work for us, and our church is next to a bar. You know, it would be a conflict of interest helping people who got, plastered over in the bar. So not every configuration works for every congregation. Sometimes even the sense of identity differs. For example, one of my former Athanasian scholars was taking a doctorate at Regent University. It's an Assemblies of God school. And the professors there did not identify themselves as evangelical. And they did not espouse an inerrancy view of the Bible, even though they hold the Bible as infallible. I had no idea until he studied there. Now, I myself have done a lot with the AG Church, and I've always considered the AG Church as evangelical. And I've had wonderful AG students who have extremely high views of the Bible. These folks at Regent, they feel that evangelicals have been hostile to them, especially spiritual gifts, and particularly inerrancy scholars have been scathing with them. So they're reluctant to consider themselves in the evangelical camp. But it's not true of all AG churches. So even in the AG, who they are is not necessarily a unified view. And then we see the same thing of churches all around the world. Churches in the Dominican Republic, in Haiti, in Africa, Brazil, South America, Korea, Pakistan, Colombia, Vietnam, China, all the different places that we have them. They're often varied, and their communal functions are varied, and as a variety of specific demands are made on them. Okay, here's my example from Nigeria. Youth in the evangelical churches of West Africa, the Equa churches, asked famed performer, Chief Commander Ebenezer Obi, you all remember him? Ebenezer Obi? Yeah. To create a beat for them as an alternative to the popular beats of Juju, which were associated originally with the calling of spirits. Where's Grace? Grace. Okay, you asked about the kithara and the drums and the piano. Okay, so with the Equa churches, here was the problem. That the Juju beat, which was very popular at the time, and Ebenezer Obi, at the last count I saw, made 110 albums. I have 11 of them. They're wonderful albums. I didn't see the other ones. But what he did was he created for the youth the Miliki beat. And this beat became very popular, so popular that it spread here to the United States. Shanachi Records in the U.S. released a collection of his Miliki recordings, which I have. Ebenezer Obi, very high-profile Christian. And reportedly, he financed the building of the Equa Church in Lagos. Now, he constantly includes Jesus on his songs and other biblical figures on many of his albums. And on his album covers, he addresses his audience, and here's one quote, "Sincere love and warm greetings to my entire fans in Jesus' name." And this certainly impacted the face of evangelical popular culture in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the hotbeds of popular music. Some of the best stuff in music comes out of Nigeria. I mean, world-class performers. Magic Fashik is from Nigeria, and there's a lot. Get into them all, but this is a popular place. Now, today, I think this heritage is very rich, it's very strong, and Christians have really used popular music effectively. Now, our Nigerians might want to add anything to this? Okay. So, are you satisfied with that? Good. All right, well, you don't disagree, right? And so, just as the rapport between Christians and Rastafari has done the same in Jamaica. Now, in Jamaica, Rastafarians at first were 90% of all Rastas came out of Christianity. So there was that departure conflict that was going on. However, then the Christians clued in, began to wear dashikis and to have locks and adopt reggae. And at a certain point, Christian reggae was outselling secular reggae. It was being done so well. In the meantime, the response, because Christians were bringing forward some of the writings of Haile Selassie, where he's flagrantly Christian. A friend of Billy Graham's did the first devotional for the Lausanne Conference in 1966 called Building a Strong Tower. And then the leader of the 12 Tribes, which is 12 Tribes of Israel, it's the group that Bob Marley is associated with, many of the intellectuals. The prophet Gad got on IRA FM, which is the big radio station there, and declared his loyalty to Jesus. And so Rastas began to call the 12 Tribes the Jesus Boys. And their rapport with the Christian church is very strong. And so we have agreement on a lot of stuff, not on the ganja, but on a lot of the other stuff. So it's questions of practice, not necessarily questions of faith. Because they're very orthodox, because they're following Haile Selassie, who is a good Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. So the music, often enough, I notice on Grace Thriller albums, a lot of the musicians will be Rastafarians, playing on the Christian albums, and vice versa. Yeah. So there you go. Christian youth sporting dreadlocks and espousing loyalty to Jesus Christ. They don't say Jesus. They say Jesus, because the first ship that Queen Elizabeth gave to the pirate Hawkins was the SS Jesus, so they don't They don't use that name. But they use Jesus, being the true over I, which is the affectionate designation for God. Now, in many, if not all cases, such different issues result in a contextualized evangelical theology and practice. For example, one great Korean evangelical statesman, Bong Rin-ro, wrote the Bible and theology in Asian context, and he seamlessly flowed his arguments over to another book, a very pragmatic book called Christian Alternatives to Ancestor Practices, which is a very interesting book. Even if a church has been founded by missionaries and is identified as evangelical, its contribution to the worldwide understanding of what it means to be historically orthodox while incarnating in culture will be unique and instructive to us. For example, and this is where I want to show an example of African thinking, which makes it much more accessible to us to understand. In African thinking, the either-or way that Western thought is done, especially American thought, is replaced by a both-and. And therefore, understanding how God can be one yet three, which is so difficult to explain to the Western mindset, can be supplemented in our consciousness raising by incorporating both-and thinking of African thought, where one's deeds and one's ancestors' deeds, for example, are sometimes fused together in one sense of self-identity. So that Jesus' words, that he does only what the Father does, that seeing him is seeing the Father, that he and the Father are one, and yet they are still distinct, make perfect sense. He shares the same substance as the Father and is one in will, even as he is a separate person. As in any analogy, of course, there is a point of correspondence. But the exercise helps us deal with the problem of choosing between complete equation, Jesus is the Father, which would be heretical, or complete distinction, there are two gods in agreement, toward which either-or thinking channels us. Both-and thinking helps us keep the tension that God is one, individual in nature, and has eternally existed in three distinct, co-eternal, co-equal persons, not aspects, not manifestations, not modes, not moods. So, these are some of just a few of the underlying questions that come into tonight's panel. Because we're asking about exploring some global issues in the evangelical churches across the world. And we're going to have our panel respond to our multicultural book on urban ministry. Not that they had to read it, but some of the ideas, you had to read it, and some of the ideas that emerge from that. So to finish up here, we're part of a global faith across the nations and down through the ages. Our panel tonight is about the theological cultures that make up the church, which we might call ethnic theologies. So we have this wonderful representation. We have Pastor Lawrence, who is from Kenyan churches. I'm not going to say a whole lot about Pastor Lawrence, except one thing. Other than the fact that he's a wonderfully dear brother and I love him to pieces. He's the planter of 23 churches. Wow. That is amazing. I can't even conceive how anybody could live long enough to plant 23 churches. This man has done it. Amazing. We have Mark Shan. Mark is a scholar who's written numerous books. He's the founder of a Christian scholarly organization, globally known, was an expert in China in a non-Christian form of thought, then became a Christian in the United States, and is renowned through the entire world. I'll let him talk more about that. Simeon Damas, one of the most illustrious of the Athanasian scholars that I've ever had, really sets the tone for everybody, has done one of the most interesting, let's call it, one of the most interesting and groundbreaking things that I have seen in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a very interesting place. Simeon became the pastor of a basically Anglo congregation. It's 5 years now. His people absolutely love him. Here is a Haitian born in Haiti who has so transcended cultures that he preserves his heritage and has completely been able to subsume in his ministry Anglo culture till he's the choice, and it's to Simeon that they come with their cares and concerns, even the elderly, in a fairly wealthy church in a most suburban type place. And he's been a phenomenal success there. So when I told you, I asked the best to come. So then I wanted to add our dear brother Taewan. Taewan, while he was a student here, developed a ministry to street people in Cambridge. And he got on first name basis with street people there that most of us would either be afraid of or just drive by or in some way, you know, probably not even notice. And he would go down every single weekend and deal with them. He went and took some courses in law, and then he's back here getting his next degree. He's already graduated, and he's doing his next degree. So it's very, these are unique ministries. They're ministries that touch several ethnicities, and ministries that are already shaking the world. Okay, so that's why these folks are here tonight. I think that if we want to capture what Jesus meant when he said if he was lifted up, he would draw all nations to himself, where better could you study this than at CUME, which is the cutting-edge seminary, or I should say the cutting-edge campus of the flagship seminary of evangelicalism. This is where the future lies. This is why it's just a joy to teach here year after year after year. Even though I'm retiring now, I'm going to still teach Theology 1, so everybody can learn how to do theology right. And because I like to stay connected with this. This is the air of Conwell, where I went to school. It's the cutting edge place. So here's what we're going to do. We're all going to follow Babatunde and take a little break. And let's be back. And what do you think? Can we be back in 20 minutes tonight?